meets the Redmi Note 11 Pro, the ultimate Note from Redmi's lineup this year. It charges from 0 to 51% in about 15 minutes. It has a huge display, AMOLED display, which refreshes at 120Hz refresh rates. My unit here has 8 gigs of RAM, and this smartphone retails for 170,000 naira, roughly $340. But come on guys, is this device actually worth your money? We're gonna find out, and so without taking much of your time, yo guys, let's get started. This is the largest smartphone from the Redmi Note 11 lineup this year, and from the box you should expect to see the SIM ejector, a TPU case, the paperwork, a USB-C to Type-A connector, a massive 67 watts fast charger, and this is actually the fastest charger I've used on a smartphone if I recall correctly. And of course, the smartphone itself, which is actually a huge smartphone to hold. Design isn't that far from what you see from the siblings in this lineup this year. That's the regular Redmi Note 11, the Redmi Note 11S also. But this one here, aside being a little bit larger, it takes that flat design a step further, and this rear is actually made out of glass, unlike the plastic you get from its siblings. So you get a plastic frame though, and also more flat rear, with no form of curve whatsoever to this rear. This is more like an iPhone-like design if you ask me. Not forgetting the fingerprint sensor, which is a super fast sensor as expected for those side-mounted scanners. There's actually nothing to complain about the scanner here. The audio jack with the top firing speaker and the IR blaster to control your electronics maintain the top side, USB ports, down firing speakers, and the mouthpiece opening. You also have the hybrid SIM tray at the bottom side of the smartphone. The memory can be expanded using the micro SD card slot up to 1 terabyte, but internally you get 128 gigs of internal storage with 8 gigs of RAM, as with my unit here. Note that the memory expansion slot is this hybrid or shared slot between the second SIM and the micro SD card slot. One actually has to give way for the other. Other design specs that would interest you include being IP53 water and dust resistant. Also, this is definitely not a one-handed device. It's actually huge and not my favorite size for a smartphone. A 6.67-inch AMOLED display is what you get with the Redmi Note 11 Pro, and it still retains the 1080p resolution, actually full HD plus panel, but this time you have 120Hz refresh rates on this display. Redmi still retains the various settings for your display, so to boost your color vibrancy or having that more muted display from your display settings depending on your preference here. As with the 11S on this lineup, this display is actually quite bright and can be used comfortably outdoors, but it has this slightly warmer tone to it when compared to the other devices on this lineup. Speakers this time are quite about the best you get for this price point. You have a stereo top and down firing speaker configuration from the Redmi Note 11 Pro. Although at the max volume you somehow begin to hear a slight distortion in the sound when these speakers are quite loud, but they are quite loud for what they are and good for your music playback. It is a bit of a shame that the all-new Redmi Note 11 Pro comes out of the box with Android 11 instead of Android 12, and you should expect MIUI 13 out of the box, which is not that different from MIUI 12 you might be used to if you already used Redmi devices in the past. Of course, as with MIUI, you should expect a couple bloatware running here, and most likely most of them are removable from this OS. I think I like what Redmi has done here with this UI, and with the design still borrowing a lot of design cues from iOS. You get the Helio G96 processor on here for processing, which is an efficient 12nm chipset for mid-range devices. The processor on here is good for mid-range gaming and handles basic mobile computing tasks efficiently. This is definitely a processor that gets the job done. My unit here runs on 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of internal storage, and the good thing about the RAM here is that Redmi gives you this feature to use your storage as additional RAM if needs arises, making it possible to extend the RAM on here from 8 gigs to 11 gigs for the smartphone. I wouldn't say the gaming on the smartphone doesn't come with occasional jitters, as I noticed while playing PUBG on here, but I can assure you an enjoyable experience for such titles. Meanwhile, PUBG maxed out at HD graphics and high frame rates, and this device got noticeably warm while gaming for the first 10 minutes. Here's the benchmark score for the Redmi Note 11 Pro after several runs, and this is actually lower than what we got from the 6 gigs variant of my Redmi Note 11S. I wonder what happened here. A quad camera setup is what you get from the smartphone, with the main sensor being 108 megapixels. You get an 8 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixels for the depth and macro lenses, while the front facing camera on here is a 16 megapixel punch hole cutout front facing camera. As far as image quality go here, I think these are great looking photos you get from the smartphone. You have good dynamic range and colorful photos, especially when the subject is properly lit. As you can see from these photos, with a little bit of edit and even straight out of the camera, these are images you can use for social media posting. They'll look like more expensive smartphones took them. The photos from the ultra-wide are lacking in that same amount of detail and quality you get from the main lens, so I do not recommend using them most of the time. I'd rather take a few steps back and capture using the main camera for wider photos when the need arises. The front-facing camera might not be the best you get out here, but it does a decent job at taking photos. You'd notice this whole smoothing thing going on with the front-facing camera here, and even without that feature being turned on in the camera app. Let me know if you'd want to see a Gcam version review for the cameras on here, as that would drastically improve the cameras on the smartphone. Videos from both the front and the rear cameras on the Redmi Note 11 Pro can be recorded at a max resolution of 1080p. Now I wonder why they had to cap this out at 1080p instead of having to give us 4K as we expected from this device. A 5000 mAh battery is what you get from the Redmi Note 11 Pro. This smartphone will definitely take you on a single charge till the end of the day before having to reduce or recharge the smartphone for the next day. The good thing about this 67-watt charger included in the box is the fact that you can reduce the smartphone to 51% in 50 minutes like I mentioned earlier. I mean, I don't see anyone having issues with the battery life on the Redmi Note 11 Pro. The Redmi Note 11 Pro is quite a solid device to own. In fact, this is the Redmi Note 11S with a slightly larger display that refreshes at 120Hz instead of 90Hz, with a slightly better sounding speaker, faster charger, and Corning Gorilla Glass 5 protection on the display for an extra 35,000 Naira or about $60 to $70. Having known that, you can see where I compared the Redmi Note 11 and 11S here. Call it that day.